The Christmas lights are dimmed, the festivities muted, and in the heart of one of the world's greatest cities, a political firestorm is raging. Nigel Farage, never one to mince words, has launched an explosive attack on London's Mayor Sadiq Khan, accusing him of nothing less than cancelling Christmas itself. Live on national television with millions watching, Farage unleashed a torrent of fury that left the studio audience stunned and the nation divided. But what really happened? Is Christmas truly being cancelled in London, or is this yet another chapter in Britain's never-ending culture wars? The accusations are serious, the implications are staggering, and the confrontation that unfolded was nothing short of extraordinary. This is the story of how a festive season became a political battlefield and how one man's rage captured the attention of an entire country. The scene was set for confrontation from the very first moment. Nigel Farage, the political provocateur who has spent decades challenging the establishment, sat across from the host with that familiar look of barely contained anger. His jaw was set, his eyes were fixed. And everyone watching knew that something explosive was about to happen. The topic that had brought him to the studio was one that had been simmering for weeks, bubbling under the surface of British political discourse like a volcano ready to erupt. Christmas in London, or rather the alleged absence of it. Farage wasted no time. Within seconds of the discussion beginning, he launched into what can only be described as a full-throated assault on Sadiq Khan and his administration at City Hall. The words came fast and furious, each one carefully chosen for maximum impact. Cancel culture, he thundered, has finally come for Christmas itself. And according to Farage, the man responsible was sitting in the mayor's office, systematically dismantling British traditions, one festive decoration at a time. But what exactly was Farage talking about? What had sparked this incandescent rage? The controversy centred on several decisions made by Khan's administration regarding Christmas celebrations in the capital. First, there were reports that certain councils in London had scaled back their Christmas displays, citing budget constraints and a desire to be more inclusive of other faiths and celebrations. Then came the allegations that the word Christmas itself was being removed from promotional materials in favour of more generic terms like winter celebrations or festive season. And perhaps most controversially, there were claims that some public spaces were reducing traditional Christmas imagery, replacing nativity scenes and crosses with more secular decorations. To Farage and his supporters, these weren't mere administrative decisions. They were evidence of a deliberate campaign to erase British culture and Christian heritage from public life. Farage didn't hold back. With the cameras rolling and millions watching from their homes, he painted a picture of a mayor who was more concerned with political correctness than preserving the traditions that had defined London for centuries. He spoke of families who felt alienated in their own city, of children who were being denied the magical Christmas experiences that previous generations had taken for granted. He invoked the spirit of Christmases past, when London blazed with lights and decorations, when carol singers filled the streets, and when nobody had to apologise for celebrating the most important date in the Christian calendar. The city of Dickens and Scrooge, he declared, was being turned into a cultural wasteland by an administration that seemed ashamed of its own heritage. The passion in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just political point scoring. For Farage, this was a battle for the soul of Britain itself. The host tried to interject, to provide context, to present the other side of the story. But Farage was in full flow now, unstoppable. He pointed to statistics and surveys that he claimed showed overwhelming public support for traditional Christmas celebrations. He cited examples from other cities, both in Britain and abroad, where mayors had stood firm in defence of Christmas against what he called the forces of secular progressivism. He demanded to know why Sadiq Khan couldn't do the same. Why, he asked, was the Mayor of London so determined to diminish Christmas when the vast majority of Londoners, regardless of their faith or background, wanted to see the city celebrate in style? The questions hung in the air like accusations, each one more pointed than the last. And as Farage continued his tirade, it became clear that this was about far more than just Christmas lights and decorations. This was about identity, about belonging, about who gets to decide what British culture looks like in the 21st century. The reaction on social media was immediate and explosive, Within minutes of Farage's appearance, clips of his rant were being shared thousands of times. Hashtags related to Christmas and Sadiq Khan began trending. The nation was dividing in real time, with some praising Farage for standing up for traditional values and others condemning him for stirring up division and spreading misinformation. The debate that had been confined to council meetings and newspaper opinion pages had suddenly become a national conversation, amplified by Farage's television appearance and his undeniable ability to generate headlines. Support poured in from unexpected quarters. Religious leaders from various Christian denominations expressed concern about the diminishing visibility of Christmas in public spaces. Community groups shared stories of local celebrations being scaled back or renamed. Even some who disagreed with Farage's politics found themselves nodding along with his basic premise that Christmas, as a cultural institution, deserved to be celebrated openly and proudly. But as with all political controversies, the reality was far more complex than the soundbites suggested. To understand what was really happening with Christmas in London, you had to look beyond the headlines and examine the actual policies and decisions that had sparked the outrage. And when you did that, a very different picture began to emerge. The truth was that Christmas wasn't being cancelled in London, not remotely. The city's famous Christmas lights on Oxford Street and Regent Street were still illuminating the winter nights. Trafalgar Square still hosted its giant Christmas tree, donated each year by Norway as a symbol of gratitude for British support during World War II. The Christmas markets were still operating, selling everything from mulled wine to handcrafted decorations. Covent Garden was still transformed into a winter wonderland. And Westminster Abbey was still holding its traditional Christmas services as it had done for centuries. What had changed, however, was the approach to public messaging and the distribution of resources. Some councils in London, facing severe budget pressures after years of austerity measures imposed by central government, had made difficult decisions about where to allocate limited funds. In some cases, this meant smaller Christmas displays or combining Christmas celebrations with other winter festivals to maximise community engagement. The use of terms like winter festivals or seasonal celebrations wasn't an attempt to erase Christmas, as Farage claimed, but rather an effort to be inclusive of the city's incredibly diverse population. London in 2025 was home to people from every corner of the globe, representing virtually every major religion and cultural tradition. For Khan's administration, the challenge was how to honour Christmas while also acknowledging and celebrating this diversity. It was a balancing act that was never going to satisfy everyone. Mayor Khan himself had actually been quite vocal in his support for Christmas. In previous years, he had attended Christmas events, posed for photographs in front of Christmas trees, and released statements wishing Londoners a Merry Christmas. His own background as the Muslim son of a bus driver from Pakistan had never prevented him from participating in and promoting the city's Christmas celebrations. In fact, Khan had often spoken about how his parents had always acknowledged Christmas as an important part of British culture, and how he had grown up respecting and enjoying the festive season, even though it wasn't his own religious holiday. The idea that he was engaged in some kind of campaign to cancel Christmas, therefore, seemed to many observers to be a gross mischaracterisation of his actual record. But nuance and context don't always survive in the heat of political combat, especially when someone as skilled as Farage is controlling the narrative. The confrontation on live television continued to escalate. As Farage paused for breath, the host attempted to bring some balance to the discussion by presenting facts about Christmas celebrations that were still happening across London. But Farage dismissed these as missing the point. It's not about whether Christmas technically exists, he argued. It's about the message being sent. It's about the slow erosion of our traditions, death by 1,000 cuts. Every time you rename a Christmas market to a winter market, every time you remove a nativity scene from a public building, every time you tell school children they can't sing traditional carols because they might offend someone, you're chipping away at something precious, and eventually, he warned, there'll be nothing left. This slippery slope argument resonated with many viewers who had their own anxieties about rapid social change and the perceived loss of traditional British identity. What made this controversy particularly potent was its timing. Britain was still grappling with the aftermath of Brexit, with ongoing debates about what it meant to be British and what kind of country the nation wanted to be. Immigration, integration, and national identity were already sensitive topics. The question of how to balance respect for diversity with the preservation of traditional culture was one that the politicians of all stripes struggled to answer satisfactorily. Christmas, as perhaps the most visible and universally recognised British tradition, had become a symbolic battleground in these larger culture wars. When Farage accused Khan of cancelling Christmas, he wasn't just talking about lights and decorations. He was tapping into deeper fears about cultural displacement and the changing character of British society. And for many people watching, his anger felt validating, giving voice to concerns they had been harbouring, but hadn't known how the studio atmosphere had become electric with tension. Other guests who had been invited to discuss the issue found themselves drawn into the fray. A representative from a multicultural community organisation tried to explain that acknowledging diversity didn't mean diminishing Christmas, but rather enriching the city's cultural tapestry. London has always been a city of many faiths and none, she argued. Making space for Diwali, Hanukkah, Eid and other celebrations doesn't take anything away from Christmas. If anything, it makes Christmas more special because it's part of a year-round calendar of celebrations that brings communities together. But Farage wasn't having it. This isn't about other celebrations, he shot back. Nobody is saying we shouldn't celebrate Diwali or Eid. This is about the specific targeting of Christian traditions, the deliberate downplaying of Christmas in a historically Christian country. The clash of worldviews couldn't have been more stark. A political analyst attempted to inject some data into the heated exchange. She pointed out that surveys consistently showed that the majority of Londoners, including many who weren't Christian, supported traditional Christmas celebrations and saw them as part of the city's cultural heritage. But the same surveys also showed strong support for acknowledging other festivals and making public spaces welcoming to all communities. The challenge, she suggested, was finding the right balance, and perhaps different people would draw that line in different places. Farage seized on this. If the majority support Christmas, he demanded, then why is the mayor trying to water it down? Shouldn't democracy mean that the majority view prevails? The analyst tried to explain that protecting minority rights and perspectives was also a fundamental democratic principle, but her words were drowned out by the crossfire of arguments now erupting from all sides to articulate.